Well, hello and welcome to ILoveGay today. And today we're focused on the world of business from on a global scale. And we're here with the folks at Open for Business, which is an organization that really focuses on corporate involvement in LGBT inclusion worldwide. And they have a really special project they're focused on with a survey focused on the LGBT residents in the Caribbean. So how are you guys?
Excited?
All good here.
Phil, it's good to see you. I know we've chatted in
You
weeks
too.
past because we have so many, I want to say not just friends, but colleagues and so forth in common with Peter Jordan and others that are all kind of part
Right.
of your team, pushing
Right.
a lot of the LGBT tourism side of the initiatives for Open for Business together. So we love it.
Absolutely. Yeah, so pleased to connect over this. As you said, it's a small but amazing world of folks out there. So I'm glad we get to talk now.
Well, for those that don't know about Open for Business, tell us a little bit about who you guys are. And
Yeah, absolutely. Open for Business is a charity, is an NGO that started in 2015 as a way to bring together the private sector, many corporations, and say, let's really take serious the issue of LGBT issues. Because at around that time, there has been in the advocacy space more and more organizations trying to engage the private sector as a way to get them to be more inclusive in the workplace.
yeah.
But Open for Business goes a step further and says, let's work on LGBT issues in the cultural and political context in which you work, right? So when there's a piece of discriminatory legislation or there's a governmental crackdown, Open for Business tries to galvanize them to work on these issues within the countries that they work, which is a really fantastic way to kind of galvanize such powerful institutions, powerful businesses. And to do so, they really had to articulate the business and economic case for LGBT inclusion. And that's what they've been working on for 5 years now, really looking at global analysis, baseline data that looks for the correlation between LGBT rights and inclusion, business outcomes, and economic outcomes, and says, of course, this is related. Let's do much more on this. And that's kind of how we come to the work at the country and regional level, specifically in the English-speaking Caribbean. And I will say this is working. This is something that is quite fascinating. Many of the corporate partners include Accenture, Brunswick, AT&T, EY, MasterCard. But actually, as of yesterday, we're really thrilled to announce on International Human Rights Day, 10 more companies that join this cause, bringing it up to 36 multinational companies as part of this Open for Business ecosystem. And there, I'll just give very quick shout out to the founder and chair, John Miller, as well as our executive director, Catherine Dovey.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I saw that yesterday. I saw the announcement come out. So I thought it was perfect timing that we were getting together right around then.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just a perfect way to celebrate how on a day of human rights that more within the private sector are becoming so concerned on these issues.
Yeah. And now you're putting emphasis and focus on the Caribbean and with the survey. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So in articulating that business and economic case, they have made very strong global arguments based on global data sets. But to really bring it to the next level, they said, let's do this at the country and regional level. And about a year to a year and a half ago, they did this very strong research that looks at the overall economic impact of LGBT exclusion in Kenya. And found that impact is quite strong. Of course it is. When you exclude LGBT people from key sectors, there is an economic impact as well as a business impact. So they were able to pivot that research into working with a leader in that space. And now that is our colleague. Shout out to Yvonne, who is utilizing the research to bring together the business sector and say, how do we create policies of non-discrimination within the workplace, and how do we become more active in the cultural context in which we work? So we know that algorithm of engagement works. It's quite powerful. And they wanted to do that elsewhere. So they were really lucky to launch 2 initiatives, one in Eastern Europe that is run by my colleague, George, and then in the English-speaking Caribbean with financial support from Virgin Atlantic. And Virgin Atlantic said, you know, given that tourism is such a large part of the region, how do we capture the potential impact of discriminatory laws that are on the books and the likelihood of a prospective tourist to come to the region? So we said, let's try to measure that, but let's be very robust. Let's interview business leaders, not just in tourism, but key sectors. Let's disseminate a tourism survey, and let's disseminate another survey to the LGBT community in the region.
Yeah.
The tourism survey is now live, and you know, really picks upon a lot of some of the major concerns that are there that Caleb who is working with us as part of our program advisory board, is one of many civil society and key leaders who are helping us guide this research in a participatory manner. But I'll turn it over to you, Caleb, to speak to the tourism side.
So for the Caribbean, why is this effort at doing a survey important?
Yeah.
We know from regional data that the region generates about $59 billion in GDP. That's important. We know that among CARICOM member states, there are 16 million people, and they have a GDP collectively of 81 billion. We know if we use the Kinsey study that 10% of a given population might be gay, the estimate, that estimate becomes important in the way travel arrangements occur. But it also highlights a very important point, and that is that there is data deficiency problems across the region, and the survey offers an opportunity to highlight some of the issues that have developed. More importantly, Phil talks about decriminalization. I just finished a litigation case. In fact, I was the first among CARICOM member states to decriminalize our sodomy law, finally in 2019, and that has helped to shape and influence the way litigation is occurring in the other 9 states that have similar laws. The data that they collect can be leveraged for engaging the private sector. It can be used to engage politicians, and it can be used to engage communities with regards to an advocacy-based research approach to their advocacy. Now, for me, it's transformative. It can be transformative if you have the structures in place. And we know over the last 20 years, there are LGBT voices and representations in the OECS countries, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States. In fact, there's a regional group called ECADE. For my country, I run the oldest and only LGBT-led policy and advocacy organization. And we've been effective in not only decriminalizing, but advancing hate crime legislation, advancing anti-discrimination legislation and consequential amendments. And why, and so progress has been made, and while governments in this region may not be LGBT friendly from those looking outside in, governments have never deliberately said we'll jail the LGBT people or we'll shut down all the LGBT organizations in the region. Government has been mostly constructive. One can argue in that constructive level of governance, it allows LGBT organizations to thrive, represent, and be at the table to bring the transformation that people are looking for, not only within the region, but people who are identifying as problematic that don't live within the region. I think it's also important to recognize that economic empowerment exists side by side with civil rights and human rights advancement. One does not exist without the other. And in that regard, when we're talking about data, we're talking about the lives of people. They're not just data points. They're people with families. They're people who have loved ones. They're people who have children. And as such, change comes with time. It didn't, for American Western Europe, it took 40 years to bring marriage equality. I'm hoping that for Belize, it won't take 40 years in our tech-based approach to communication. But we shall see what happens next as we move to advance our work for legislative reform, especially in Belize. And I'd like to say Belize is the regional leader in being the first to decriminalize our sodomy law, the first to co-sponsor LGBT resolutions at the OAS, have supported LGBT resolution for extrajudicial killing based on sexual orientation and gender identity at the UN, and the first to introduce anti-discrimination legislation that is inclusive of sexual orientation and gender identity. So what I'm saying is that there's hope for the region. And as such, it's best that they invest their time, and for those trolls out there, it's best they invest their time and energy to provide support, to reach out to the advocacy organization. If they want to do something, don't complain. Fundraise. We're here to fence scale the issue. We're not here to fence sit on the issue. Complaining or whining about what's wrong in the region isn't going to fix the region. So I say work with us and let's get us to the ideal place that we're all looking for.
Well put, good point. And that's it. It's just that, yeah, the Caribbean is I wouldn't say infamous, but there's a lot of rhetoric that goes on about whether it's safe for LGBT people. And there's all these examples with an Atlantis cruise landing in port and so forth. But the only way to ever deal with it or fix it is to focus or talk about those issues and figure out ways to be able to move forward and onward and fix those. So I applaud you for being kind of at the forefront of being able putting those discussions out there.
Well, where I'm at, when I started we were the first organization to be visible. And I was the first shameless gay man on TV. I say shameless because there were others covered with voice and the whole 9 years. I showed my face. And one of the things you learn is that societies don't change if you don't put in the work. And my work, people must understand, is transnational, which is it crosses borders, and it is national. So I've gotten to meet Prime Minister of Malta. I've hugged Vice President Biden in September 2016 at the UN. I've met the UK Prime Minister and a host of other diplomats, learning about what it means to get politicians to move. And one of the things I learned in that process is that integrity and values are the core part of bringing changes. And part of that include recognizing that marginalized population or LGBT people who are afraid or invisible must represent themselves and drive the process. In this particular regard with the survey, it is LGBT people driving the process of data collection. It's not the state. We recognize the state has a myriad of things that they must deal with, and so the state must be leveraged, or we must be our own facilitator. It's finding out what the quality of life we have and what are the opportunities economically. This is the value of open for business. Even if it doesn't change anything in the long term, it does change the psychology about how do we treat data, and if we can consider data currency in the next level engagement work that we must do in the region.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, go ahead.
And just to build on the data point, because Caleb and I talk about this a lot, there's so many data and knowledge gaps when it comes to LGBT people, when it comes to their outcomes, the realities, the challenges that they face in education, healthcare, employment, as well as, what is the experience for tourists or travelers coming to that area. There's all these data questions that are so sorely lacking. There's so many data gaps, data deserts, that really limits our knowledge in terms of what we can truly say about the scope and depth of the issues that are faced, which is highly problematic, particularly during a pandemic, right? It's not only that on good days we're left out of this equation, but even during a pandemic, we don't know the extent of how many LGBT people are getting sick or losing their work or their jobs. So what this does is a dual process of being left invisible from state data collection efforts, as well as being hypervisible in your daily lives when the mainstream looks at you, particularly for gender nonconforming people. you're seen as hypervisible yet invisible, right? And that's kind of the dual experience in which we operate, which is so highly problematic. So what we really want to do with this research, and you know, there's a lot of new pieces of LGBT research that are emerging recently, and that's a great thing. And with this one in particular, we're trying to generate those, particularly through a socioeconomic and business lens, to really understand if there are poverty cycles, if there are you know, push factors that contribute LGBT people from leaving the Caribbean. And with this tourism one, we're really trying to see, do homophobic and transphobic laws that exist on the books, in addition to stigma, does that create as a disincentive for tourists not to come to the region, right? And this has not quite been done before. And I give a shout out to Peter Jordan, as you mentioned before, who is part of this effort. And it's not quite been done before. And we really need to understand some of those factors that disincentivize tourists from coming back, given that tourism is such a large part of the GDPs in these countries. And as we're looking at an economic downturn because of the pandemic, in addition to, or as more governments are creating more economic recovery strategies that start with tourism components, we really need to say, is it tenable to have these laws on the books if, in fact, X% of an LGBT and allied base of tourists don't want to come to the region because of these? Yeah, so what can we do to take advantage of this economic recovery moment to come back stronger, better, and more inclusive?
With this, there's the stories that I came across. Like, for example, I came across a story of a trans woman surviving COVID smuggling. A trans woman smuggling? But that's how she survived. I was dealing with a story of a young man who was placed in a COVID unit. His problem, though, was that he had a brain condition that needed to leak the water that was accumulating in his brain. I had to go fix that. And the amazing thing with COVID, for example, is that it affected part of our blood bank system. I had to rally the parents to, at bare minimum, find the blood to ensure that he got his surgery. He did. He's at home and he's fine now, but the work continues. For me, the data points are just one part, and they don't exist in a vacuum. They exist in the within a context of ensuring that the dignity and rights of LGBT people are advanced, protected, and are visible to the state. One of the things I realize in our governance is that we are the last line of defense in ensuring justice, ensuring our rights are upheld or undermined, and we can't do it without some effort. So this is where I'm coming from when I get enthusiastic about what they're doing and when we discuss change and transformation. For me, the sacrifices or the data points or the foundations of the work, which is the data point being collected, is just one part of understanding that the investment in change is really not for me, but it's for the next generation who will have a better life and easier time adding to what we've created. So for now, I'm glad we've had this start, and I hope we can continue beyond just the surveying.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to make sure to, when we post this, to link directly to the survey as well as other aspects of Open for Business and your social media. So I'm very hopeful that all this will help make a difference, which I believe you guys are in the right direction for. So I really appreciate you guys being here to share your story with us.
Thank you so much. And yes, just to say, please consider taking this survey. It's, as you've seen, is going into a larger effort that is hopefully leading toward progress in the English-speaking Caribbean. It's filling in significant data and knowledge gaps that should be filled in. And you might win an Apple Watch through a prize draw. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your voices through this work.
So I have one quote, which is this, and it's where I'm coming from. When injustice is the law of the land, it is the duty of the people to resist. And that is at the heart of giving life to whatever data points we collect in this process.
Well said. Well, thank you guys both. And Look forward to seeing you soon. All right. Thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Feels good, so good.